Hello, and welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. Each episode, we talk about a particular topic in the life of a professor. We are tenure-track faculty members in the sciences, working at a primarily undergraduate university in California. The purpose of our podcast is reflection, so we bring something we think is working and something we're working on to discuss.
Welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. I'm Ruth.
And I'm Claire. And today we're going to talk about class projects. But first, Ruth, how was your week?
My week was great. As you know, we're coming up to the end of, I was going to say the end of days, end of semester. But I think I
can't imagine past the end of the semester.
I know, dude. Yeah. I think I've talked to you about maybe having some interruptions from small people.
Oh, yes.
Have
you had more recent ones?
Yes, like this one did not involve toilet questions, so that was good. But I did during like an important interview have to like turn off my camera and go and rescue a child who had no toilet paper on the toilet. So that was a situation. But this time we've been really talking about like when is an urgent question? Like what is an urgent question? And so my youngest came in when I was in a meeting and I was on mute, so it was okay. But she was like, "Mom," and I was like, "Yeah," like, and I was kind of looking like, "Is this really urgent?" She was like, "It really is. This meets the threshold." And I was like, "Okay, go for it." And then she was like, "Do otters have whiskers?" I was like, "Oh my God!" Like, it was like, that's so adorable and also driving me bananas. So,
what are the threshold criteria right now?
But it's like, because we've kind of joked about like, if someone's on fire, then that definitely meets the threshold, or somebody's like. But she was like, "No, like it's really urgent." I was like, okay. And so like, yeah.
That's
so I
great.
Whatever my messaging is, or like, I think I just have to come up with every circumstance. Be like, do otters have whiskers? Is not an urgent question. Do pandas like have tails? Not an urgent question. Like that, like have all of those things written down so they know.
Oh man. I love that question though. They do, right? I can picture whiskers.
I said yes, but I don't know. I was just like, yes, go away, please. That's like, but yeah. But they're so, I mean, the kids are so.
What a question. I love it.
Yeah, it's so adorable. But the things they come up with are, yeah, hilarious and adorable and also kind of irritating, but they're wonderful. So yeah. So tell me about, how was your week? Do otters have whiskers? That is the question for you.
My week has been good. I think otters have whiskers. And
this needs to be like, maybe that will be what we ask all of our interview guests. Like, so urgently, we need to know.
This is important. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I've been back in the lab. I went back in the lab for the first time in a long, long time. I mean, like, I've been in my lab, but actually,
so you mean your research space?
I mean my research space. Yes.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah. And so. Yeah, of course I've been in it, but just me actually analyzing samples myself, I think it's been since grad school.
Oh my goodness.
So that was really exciting. It's been really fun. And I have this cool research space that's been constructed. It's been fully constructed for a few years, but my students have been mainly the ones working in there. And so now they've all graduated and it's just me. And I've yet to train any new people. So I'm kind of in this cool phase of, well, I get to decide where everything goes and why is this over here? This should be over here. And, and it's just really, I've been really enjoying organizing and really enjoying, like getting into the swing of something that I used to be such in the swing. In grad school, this is what I did, was I analyzed samples all day, every day. And so now I'm planning to do it for like a week and a half or something. And, 2 weeks and then go. So what I do is I prepare the samples to be run on this fancy instrument at University of California, Santa Cruz. And so I've got a date scheduled to run on that instrument. And so then I've got maybe 2 weeks of work of just me being solidly in the lab, preparing for that. And so it's just really fun to get back into that swing. So I've been really enjoying that.
Oh my God, I love this. This is so, because like, first of all, it's making me think, that's kind of what I hear from people who've gone on sabbatical. Is like, holy moly, I've gone actually back in the lab. And, that's so cool too that like, I mean, not that anything is cool about COVID, but I wonder if you did have students still in there, but now you get to be like, oh, hang on.
This is my space. Yeah,
and then,
that's true. That's true. Because I did have a student who was totally independent of the lab, which was amazing. We had like 2 big projects, and he did 1.5 of them totally independently in the lab, and then he got cut off with COVID, and so I'm doing the last half of that last project. But you're right. If he hadn't gotten cut off, I was having him train another person, and that, so like while we missed out on the cool training tree, now I'm in the lab and I'm like, okay, cool, let's get this set up. So I'm into it.
Right. And like, I definitely don't necessarily yearn for my PhD days as such, but there was like some, like, I'm saying simplicity and it's not the word I mean, but there's some simplicity of purpose, where you're like doing your thing and you're in that flow and you're in your groove. And like, I feel like, at this point in our careers, it's so chaotic in a way. Like there's so many different demands on your time from different sources. And I kind of love that idea of just being sort of absorbed in your task, doing your thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, me too. The goal
I'm just imagining a student coming in and being like, wait, Claire, do otters have whiskers? Is that what, like, damn it, this is my time. But,
well, that's another funny thing is because I'm in the lab so infrequently, nobody looks for me in the lab. So I'm basically invisible,
Yeah, perfect. Even better. But that's super cool to kind of, get back in there and not just be directing the students. And I wonder how it'll inform when you do start having students back in the lab.
Totally.
Like, I wonder what might be different.
I think so, because it was kind of like we moved into this new space and we're doing projects, and so it was kind of like, well, you guys can organize it how it works for you guys. That's what I said to my students. And we thought about how to organize it, but when it's just me having all the power and being the one actually moving the stuff, I don't know. I'm into it. I'm excited.
I love it. Cool.
Yes. So that kind of leads into my quote, which is from Greg McKeown's new book. So,
yes. Okay.
You may recall, Greg McKeown, well, you definitely recall, hopefully you listeners recall, that Greg McKeown has written a book called Essentialism, which we've talked about on this show a few times, and he now has a new book called Effortless. So Essentialism is about choosing what to do and only doing the essential things, and Effortless is about how to do them and how to make it effortless, or at least easier.
That sounds... You had me at effortless. That sounds wonderful. So, yeah.
So I have a quote here just from the introduction where he's talking about someone, Patrick McGinnis, who was just like working harder and harder. And the quote from him, Patrick McGinnis, says, "Working longer and harder had been the solution to every problem," McGinnis said. But all of a sudden he realized the marginal return of working harder was, in fact, negative. So it's not always the answer to work harder. And so in this book, I haven't read it all yet, but I'm super excited to finish it. Greg McKeown's talking about ways of making it easier to do the things that matter most. So in Essentialism, you choose what is essential, and then in Effortless, you figure out how to do it in a more effortless way. So I love it.
I'm super, I want to hear about this for sure. And like my first thoughts about this are... Sometimes I just, like, what I really struggle with is not getting the headspace to think about what would be more, like, sometimes you're just, like, just running into the wall over and over again because you can't kind of think of what else to do. So, yeah, I'm super intrigued about that because I think there's often my self-talk is that I'm just being lazy about something. But often it's really not true. And I'm, like, spending a lot of time and energy on something, but it's just not working. So... That's super interesting.
And it is, I love the concept that the solution isn't to work harder. And so Greg McKeown kind of talks about how he wrote the book on essentialism, literally, and he's going around touring about it, and he's super into it, but he's still kind of feeling like he has too many things to do. You know that analogy where you put the big rocks in first, and then you put the smaller rocks, and then you can fit sand, and then you can fit everything in. So you put the important parts of your life in, and then fill in from there. But he's like, what if there are too many important parts of your life and you can't even put the big rocks in? And so that's kind of the premise of where we're starting at here. Like, you've already honed it down to the things you think are essential, and it still seems like too much. Well, now it's about how you're doing it. So I don't have the answers yet because that's just
okay, good. Well, I'm glad you're going to bring it.
But we'll come back to it.
Yeah. But I think, something I really like about you bringing this stuff to us is, I think part of the problem is shame and like people assuming everyone else can handle all these rocks and just actually having realistic like, oh no, like I can only successfully work on this one thing. Like the more people kind of we get to talk about that in like all honesty instead of like I think that would be so powerful. Totally. And then people could be like, oh, it's only humanly possible to work on one major project this summer, then that's all I'm going to do. And
totally. Yeah. I've definitely felt relief a lot of the time reading Greg McKeown's work, and I highly recommend it to anyone. Because, yeah, he does state, like, you can't feel bad about not doing both those things because you could only ever do one of them. So it's just a matter of which do you want to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Okay, I'm excited to hear back about this.
Cool. All right, so class projects.
Yes. I am excited to hear from you about this because I think you have a lot more experience about this than I do.
I love projects. So we're talking about assigning projects in the class, you know, as an assignment, as opposed to, I don't know, an essay or a problem set or something, but a project. So what's working for me? So, yeah, I'm a big fan of projects. I think it really... I see a lot of people bloom in the projects, and often it's people that I don't expect, you know, maybe they've been struggling or not really engaged or interested in the class, and then we have a project, and suddenly they're super excited about what topic to pick, and they want to run all these ideas by me, and they've got all these, you know, there's just so much enthusiasm often comes from the project, so that's really cool. I also think they're really memorable. Like, I'm thinking back, I remember building this castle in high school for some project, and, you know, 2 other classmates came over and we had to build this big medieval castle. That was a project. I still remember that. That's probably the main thing I remember from that class. Or like a semester project in undergrad where we were analyzing metals in paint on toys, and we like went to the Goodwill and got a bunch of toys that had paint on them and like figured out how we were going to get the metals off, and I accidentally coated the instrument with sodium because I didn't know what I was doing. Like, that was very memorable.
I bet it was a bit.
Yeah, it was too acidic to put in the instrument, so I was like, I'll neutralize it with sodium hydroxide, which is how you would neutralize, but then there was too much sodium, and then I coated the whole instrument in sodium. So anyway, projects are memorable, so I love that about them. And I think they help a lot of people bloom. They're very memorable. And one of the things that I find helpful in setting up projects that I think is working for me is giving the students a little bit of choice in their project. So it could be the topic that they get to choose. It could be where they get sample. Like we do a lot of things where they go out and sample and then bring back things to analyze in the lab. So if they could choose where to sample and what questions they're asking, I think that choice really helps them take some ownership in the topic and be invested in their project. And so then I need to also give them some ideas or some time to choose and develop their ideas so that they can like sit and think about what they want to choose for their topic or what questions they want to ask and therefore what sampling locations they should do. So give them a little bit of time and some choice so that they can spend some time thinking about their choice and deciding what they want to do and getting really invested in their project. So that's kind of something that's working for me, is giving them some choice and some time to think about their choice.
I want you to like write a book called like Helping Students Bloom, because I love the word bloom. What a wonderful thing. And like, I love that what you're talking about like noticing students who maybe haven't been as engaged and suddenly this is their thing. And that's so beautiful to give people the opportunity to kind of make it their own and how like that can help. And okay, well, I'll tell you all my stuff about projects and my negative stuff in a minute. But here's a question I have for you.
Okay.
What do you kind of consider as being the time range? Do you know what I mean? Like when is it a big homework assignment and when is it a project? Like what would your distinguishing? And then is this something like it's a grand finale for the class, or is it multiple projects throughout, or how do you kind of...
Yeah, great questions. Yeah. I mean, that one where we were analyzing metals on paint in toys when I was an undergrad, that was a whole semester project. Like that was our task. And so we had to figure out which toys and how to analyze. And so
I want you to do a side note about which toys are dangerous for us another time. Like, let us know.
I don't think we got anything super conclusive from that, but it was very educational. But yeah, I mean, so in my classes that I teach now, we have usually there's some kind of finale project, but there's also a project some point in the middle of the semester. And I usually do like 3 lab periods, and they meet twice a week for lab. So it's like 9 hours of lab over 2 weeks where they're actually given dedicated class time to work on it. But then, of course, they think about it in advance and decide what they're going to do with those 9 hours of class time. And so that's kind of the timeline that I usually do. And I think the way I would distinguish it from a homework assignment and a homework assignment, at least the way I structure my homework, is like, do 10 problems from this worksheet, and that's not very much choice. That's not very much, you're practicing how to do something, and that's very valuable, but I wouldn't think of that as a project. A project I would think of as you're going to tackle some task that involves deciding what you're going to do, doing it, and then figuring out what you did and what that meant. At least that's how I usually think of as projects.
Yeah.
So like even thinking about building the castle in my high school project, we had to decide what we were going to do and get the materials, and we had to do it, and then we looked at it and
that's so cool.
Told the class about it. So I think having with a homework set, maybe you prepare for it, but you're sitting down, you're practicing, and that's kind of the event. Whereas the project would have some preparation and designing side, some actuating it, and then some wrap up. I guess that's what I would think of as a project.
Love it. Very cool.
Cool. So what's working for you with projects?
So for me, I think I love projects. Projects are awesome. I don't have a lot that's working. The other section is longer, but I have, like you said, I have very memorable experiences doing projects. I did a project about Rome when I was 8 or 9 or something, and it's really stuck with me, and I remember all the stuff. And then in undergrad, we had longer running projects. Definitely one semester, our lab was entirely our project, and we had to design something, which was kind of traumatic for me because circuitry is not my cup of tea at all. But I made a loudspeaker system at the end of the day. I was definitely very proud of it because it was torture. Awesome. So, I definitely see the value in project. And when you're talking about, again, that word blooming and students kind of really getting into their own, and I don't have that many deliberate projects. So I have, say, one thing is to pick one of your favorite labs from this semester and sort of do a bigger write-up and get more background information and stuff. And so that, but it's not like a project like you're talking about, actually designing a thing. And I would love to do more of that. And I'll get to why I don't. But I think the creativity and letting students, it's so funny because I know there's different ways of learning and different ways of knowing and different ways of engaging. And I kind of factually know that, but then you still secretly, my class is still very designed towards one type of learner, right? Who takes exams. And then when you do see people, I've had it a little bit with labs that have a little bit more ownership, and those people suddenly come out of nowhere and are and it's so cool to see that and give people those opportunities. Because really, when what you're talking about, that's way more reflective of what grad school would actually be like.
Sure.
Instead
of
anything
that you're doing in the real world outside of it,
Right.
I agree.
So I think it's wonderful. I guess the thing that's working for me is I'm all about it and I support it, but then I'll come to the later stuff. But
sure. Yeah. Well, just to give some examples of things that we're doing. So we have mid-semester. This is in quantitative analysis, so they're analyzing things quantitatively in the lab. We go out, they have 3 lab periods. In the first one, they get ready. And then the second one, we go out to this local marsh and they collect some samples from the marsh. And then the third day, they analyze them for some nutrients and we see how the nutrients cycle around through the marsh. And so they get to decide, sometimes they select locations where they can't really see very much. They were trying to figure out whether the water flow had some impact on the nutrients, but they didn't really see differences in their samples. And that's illuminating too. Maybe they have to change their mind and say, oh, actually it has to do with how many plants are growing in the water, And so I think that's really interesting, especially if they've come up with a hypothesis and then their data doesn't support it. That happens a lot just because there's so many variables in the environment. So anyway, I like that. And then through the pandemic, we've been doing, I think I've mentioned on here, in lieu of those kind of things where they would do a big analysis and then write a big report on it, they've been writing proposals where they come up with a topic that they want to propose to analyze, and they write a proposal like you would do.
I remember you mentioned it. That's ingenious.
And so
I love that.
Yeah, Ralph and I came up with that when I was like, what are we going to do for this project that now has to be virtual? But I think it's really cool, and one thing that I like about it that I might want to take forward is it's fairly easy in terms of implementing it in the class. You know, you say, come up with a topic, write the different sections of the report, write a final version, you know, and that doesn't involve a field trip or lab analyses or something like that. And I love all the field trips and lab analyses, but I just appreciate that this one is something that can be implemented just into the class portion.
Right.
So.
And then I guess, is that like, do they do it in groups or is it individual? That was my other question about projects that you do.
Sure. I do both. The Marsh project is usually in groups, and then usually they do a final project in that class individually. I think both work great. So I'm in favor of whatever works better for your particular group or your particular project or something.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking like with your proposal thing, I wonder with things like the Marsh, like there is this external sort of timing thing of getting there and all of that kind of stuff. But so, yeah. That's so cool.
Totally.
I love it.
Yeah, but so what I'm working on fostering collaboration. So this kind of fits into this group versus not group thing you're talking about. So, of course, I can mandate it and be like, you guys are a group and you're going to have a group presentation and a group output, you know, and that's great. And I think that often leads to good collaborations, and I'm super into that. But I'm kind of especially interested in the collaboration that forms naturally. And it happens a lot in my laboratory classes where they do lab reports, and they're fairly intensive lab reports, and they work in groups, but then they write lab reports separately. But so they already are working in groups, they already know each other, and they're allowed to chat as they're making their lab reports and help each other. And so it often does form naturally that they start to form these little groups of people that share ideas and help each other. And I like that natural, spontaneous collaboration. So I'm trying to figure out how to foster that, particularly in projects. And so I kind of like that format of having a group work on the project but then submit something independently. I think they might have the ownership of submitting it independently but still know each other and be willing to work in groups. Or maybe if they have worked in groups earlier in the class and then they have kind of an independent project, they could chat with each other.
And like, say if you're like, you know, you're obviously comfortable with people chatting, but if they handed in stuff that was like almost identical,
they can't
like
hand
do
in
you
stuff that's the same, right? Yeah, and they know that. And
Okay.
so I haven't really had any problems with that because they know they're handing in individual things and that they're expected to be individual. But I don't mind. Usually you have to interpret the data, you have to figure out how to do the calculations and all this kind of stuff. I feel like you can definitely chat about with other people.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I just feel like if people are working on similar things in similar locations for a long time, these kind of collaborations form naturally. So I haven't really like intentionally tried to structure a project yet where these collaborations might form naturally, but I think the pieces are there of like having some group work so they know each other and having them in the same place and the same time working for a long time on something that they have ownership over and might want to talk about and share ideas. I think it might be able to foster that kind of collaboration.
I love it. And I wonder, I don't know if this is getting at really what you're talking about, because it seems like you're more talking about collaboration in preparing it. But I wonder, something I've been very curious about but haven't actually engaged with is people doing like actual peer reviews of each other's work.
Yeah.
And so
I haven't done that either, but that sounds cool.
Yeah. But I wonder, could that be something like you could offer extra credit to people who would do a peer review?
That's
and
a
then
great idea.
That's like, yeah.
And I love how that's actually structured, because I don't want to get too far away from it being structured, because then people might just get left out and stuff like that. So I think that peer review is a nice way of it actually being structured, but still kind of a little bit freeform in terms of how much you choose to collaborate with each other. Yeah, I love it.
And you could even maybe as a pilot have it optional, like sign up for peer review, and then you could like cross partner people and stuff like that. So that would be interesting. And it's something, you know, again, like energy, but that's something I would be so interested in, because I remember being at a workshop where someone was like, it's so weird that we don't do that. That's the whole way that we disseminate our work is through peer review.
That
and
is
it's like,
funny.
That is weird. Like once they kind of pointed it out. So yeah. So I wonder.
You know, our senior seminar, for our chemistry graduates, they are required to practice their seminar, and they're required to go to 2 other people's practice talks or something like that.
Oh my goodness, I love that. How do you
and-
police that? Sorry.
Well, you sign up.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't actually taught it, so I don't know how you police it or anything like that. But you sign up, like somebody says, this is the time of my practice talk, and other people say, okay, I'll be there, and you need at least 2 people to
my
have said they'll be
goodness.
there. But what I notice is they go to more than 2 of them. They're only required to go to 2, but a lot of them do more. So that seems kind of like what you're getting at with this peer review thing of if you structure the beginnings of collaboration, if people want to, they could go more.
Oh, I like that. So like maybe they would continue that. But I also want to someday have a chat about like senior seminar, because
Yes, me
we
too.
don't have anything like that in the physics department. And I wish
I
we
would love
did.
to
That
talk about
sounds
some of
so
that.
genius. Okay, I love it.
So what are you working on with projects?
I think something that I think I've talked a little bit about on here before and I really struggle with is time, and already feeling quite like I'm always the slow one in the department in terms of what I get covered. And so I do feel a little bit like, and that's what, it's something I was going to ask you is, do you feel like you do more project-based work in like your upper division class, that you kind of have a lot of ownership over that class compared to like if you teach Chem 109? Like, is there...
That's true, I do.
So
Yeah.
because again, I've taught upper division classes too, but again, I sort of feel this pressure to get X amount of chapters done. And I think you can absolutely do that and still have projects integrated, but I just need to bring some energy to it.
Yeah.
And like to kind of come up with those things, because I think like everything you're saying is absolutely convincing me that it's worth it, right? Because you're really, and then even just from an equity standpoint, like you said, those students who never might have that positive experience are suddenly having it. So I think right now I'm just accepting it. This is not the time when that is going to happen. But
Right.
I think one thing that I wonder about, and I think this, we've already talked about this quite a bit, that like you just can't cater to everybody all the time about everything.
Right.
But do you have resistance from students who are like, no, thank you, I don't want to be creative. I just want to fill in the answer to all of these things. And,
Sure,
you know,
sure.
this is really annoying to me to have to do this. So,
I think so. I mean, sometimes the students who are at the top of the class for the exams and stuff like that are not the kind who want to go do a project, but a lot of times they will, because they are at the top of the class and
They
want
wanna
to stay
say,
at the top of the class, you know? And sometimes, you know, I often am surprised and pleasantly surprised when students will say like, oh man, I was really worried about the group work part of this class and did not want to do it at all. I was dreading it, but it wasn't that bad. It actually was kind of cool. And, you know, that happens a lot where
Yeah.
students really don't want to. And I understand I probably wouldn't want to either, but it's actually doing it is not as bad as it seems like it would be in your mind.
well, I think, you know, and I think, I don't know all the details, but I wonder from what you said, the projects you give are incredibly well thought out and have very like kind of good parameters. And so that to me, like whenever I did a project that was like, just go and kind of figure this thing out, but like that would send me
Right.
over the edge if it's not well defined. And so
Sure.
maybe, you know, that's part of what students
Yeah.
are enjoying is like, oh, this is really well defined. There's concrete things we're going to do. It's not, you know, too nebulous.
Yeah. And as far as the content goes, I know what you mean. I mean, that's always a thing, right? If you want to really stick with the content and really like talk about it thoroughly, you're going to get through fewer chapters. And I think that's kind of a depth versus breadth question.
Right.
Like if you do a project, it's going to stick with them. You're going to go into depth with that, but that's going to be at the cost of breadth. And I think it's valid to go depth versus breadth, but if you're in a department where you need the breadth, then that becomes a little tricky. But I wonder whether you could do it in like lab, where it seems like maybe you have a little more flexibility.
That's
of
a
what you
really
do with the
good
lab.
point. And I think, you know, one of the other professors in our department started doing for like the normal labs that we have, but they become 2-week labs. And he started like giving them much less instructions as it went on. And it's a lot more like ownership over things. And so I think maybe I'm sort of falling into that trap of like, okay, well, I either have to have the perfect project or I just won't bother. So maybe you could do like Project Light instead of,
Yeah, I
like
think
it doesn't
that's
have to
great.
be, because I have had a few labs where I don't give them that much instruction. Like there's one that's like recreating a scene from a superhero movie.
Oh yeah, you've talked
And-
about that one.
Right. And you know, I give them a lot of guidance, but I think they feel a lot more ownership over it because I don't even have a handout. I'm just like, just do that. And they're like, what? And so,
Totally.
you know, yeah. Okay.
I think so too. Like I notice in the lab sometimes, you know, they have to figure out what to do at the beginning, and that's very important time. And it's so
Yeah.
tempting to be like, guys, it's just 2 milligrams, put it in the vial, move on. But that's actually probably the most important part, is figuring out what the heck we're even doing in this lab, you know? So I think that's really cool that you give them less guidance, and then it becomes more like a project. Sure.
Right. I think maybe I'm having a bit of phobia about the word project, or like I think
Yeah,
it means
take
a
the word
certain thing.
project
Okay.
out.
Yeah, it's just like, I don't know what we'll call it, so we can sneak it up on me, so I'm not scared of it. But yeah. Well, Claire, this is super inspiring.
Cool. I'm inspired too. Now I'm excited about my projects for the fall. I need to see if I want to do anything differently.
Yeah, cool. Okay, we can report back. Project part 2. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruth.
Thanks so much for joining us on the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. We're delighted to have you as a listener, and we would love to hear from you. And if you want to email us, our address is contactprofessorpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear any of your suggestions for future shows, or professor quotes that you might want to share with us, or even just things that have come up for you when you were listening to previous episodes. And if you've been enjoying the podcast, we would love if you would spread the word. So the best way to spread word is by telling people you know, if you think they should listen to it, or you can leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.